He was the boy who stole the world's heart. With piercing blue eyes and a face that seemed carved for the silver screen, Leonardo DiCaprio became the very definition of a Hollywood idol. From Romeo plus Juliet to the phenomenon of Titanic, he wasn't just an actor, he was the symbol of a generation. Millions of fans screamed his name, magazines crowned him the King of Hollywood, and studios saw him as a golden ticket to box office success. But behind the flashing cameras and endless adoration, a darker truth lingered. Leonardo never wanted to be just another teen heartthrob. The very fame that elevated him also trapped him, suffocating him in an image he despised. While the world swooned over his looks, he longed to be recognized for his craft. And yet, year after year, Hollywood seemed unwilling to take him seriously. He delivered unforgettable performances, from The Aviator to The Departed, from Shutter Island to Inception, but the Academy refused to reward him. His failures became memes, his name a punchline in the cruel joke of Oscar night. And in his private life, the scrutiny was relentless. Paparazzi hounded him, tabloids mocked him, and his romances with models became more famous than his films. For all his success, Leonardo DiCaprio was haunted by the question, would he ever be seen for who he truly was? Or would he remain forever a prisoner of his own fame? The journey of Leonardo DiCaprio is not just one of triumph. It is a story of struggle, rejection, obsession, and the heavy crown of stardom. And the truth behind his rise to power is much darker than Hollywood dares to admit. Long before Leonardo DiCaprio became a global superstar, he was just a boy navigating the chaos of a broken home in Los Angeles. Born on November 11, 1974, Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio entered a world far from the blitz of Hollywood. His parents, George DiCaprio and Ermeline Inden Birkin, were young, artistic dreamers trying to make ends meet. George was a comic book writer and distributor, immersed in the counterculture of the 1960s, while Ermeline worked as a secretary. Almost immediately after Leonardo's birth, his parents' marriage fractured. By the time he was a toddler, they had separated, leaving him in the care of his mother. Ermeline raised her son in a cramped apartment on Hollywood's East Side, in a neighborhood plagued by crime, drugs, and poverty. Leonardo later recalled seeing prostitutes on the corner, drug addicts in alleys, and violence as a daily backdrop. It was a world defined not by luxury, but by survival. His father remained a presence, visiting often, introducing young Leonardo to the bohemian world of underground comics and counterculture art. George instilled in his son an appreciation for creativity, eccentricity, and independence. But it was Ermeline who provided stability, working tirelessly to give her son opportunities she never had. From an early age, Leonardo stood out. He had boundless energy, an expressive face, and a curiosity that couldn't be contained. He performed for his mother, mimicking characters, making voices, telling stories. Ermeline saw something in her son, a spark that needed nurturing. Despite their limited means, she supported his dreams, driving him to auditions after school, encouraging him to chase opportunities. But those auditions were brutal. Casting directors dismissed him for his unusual name, for his shaggy blonde hair, for his husky voice that didn't fit the mold. At one point, his agent even suggested he change his name to something more American, like Lenny Williams, claiming Leonardo DiCaprio would never sell. He refused. Even as a child, he clung fiercely to his identity. The rejections piled up. For years, Leonardo auditioned for commercials and bit parts, often leaving in tears. But he persisted. His first break came in television, with small roles in shows like Growing Pains and Santa Barbara. He was still just a teenager, but already his presence was undeniable. Casting directors noticed that unlike many child actors, Leonardo could deliver emotion that felt raw, real, unpolished. Behind the auditions, however, his personal life remained turbulent. Money was always scarce. He wore secondhand clothes, envied classmates who had stability, and often felt like an outsider. in the glamorous city that surrounded him. The glitter of Hollywood was blocks away, yet impossibly distant. School was difficult. Restless and easily bored, Leonardo often found himself in trouble, distracted, or daydreaming. Acting became his refuge, the one place where his energy and imagination weren't liabilities, but gifts. On stage, he could transform, escape, and for a few moments, leave behind the shadows of poverty and instability. But there was something deeper driving him. Growing up in a neighborhood scarred by addiction and violence, Leonardo had seen firsthand how easily lives could collapse. He was determined not to be swallowed by that world. Acting wasn't just a dream, it was a way out. His mother believed in him completely. She would later say she felt destined to raise Leonardo for something greater. She sacrificed everything, working long hours and pouring every resource she had into his career. Together, they formed a partnership, the ambitious son and the unwavering mother. By his mid-teens, Leonardo began landing more substantial roles. He played troubled youths, outcasts, and vulnerable characters, roles that mirrored the struggles he had witnessed in real life. There was no artifice in his performances. He drew from the pain and chaos of his own upbringing. Critics began to notice. The boy who had once been told to change his name was now on the verge of proving everyone wrong. He had talent, raw, undeniable, and rare. And with every small role, every guest spot, every rejection turned into opportunity. Leonardo DiCaprio was carving a path out of the broken streets of East Hollywood and toward the destiny that awaited him. But the journey was only beginning. The boy from poverty was about to become Hollywood's new obsession, and with it would come a kind of fame he was never truly prepared for. By the early 1990s, Leonardo DiCaprio was still just another struggling young actor in Los Angeles. But everything began to change in 1993 when he landed a role opposite Robert De Niro in This Boy's Life. It was a turning point. The film told the story of a troubled teenager, and DiCaprio's performance stunned critics. He wasn't intimidated by De Niro, one of the greatest actors alive. Instead, he matched him scene for scene with an intensity and authenticity that couldn't be ignored. Suddenly, Hollywood began to take notice. That same year, he delivered a performance that would forever alter the trajectory of his career, What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Cast as Arnie, a mentally challenged teenager, DiCaprio brought such vulnerability and raw truth to the role that audiences forgot they were watching a performance. His work was heartbreaking, tender, and astonishingly mature for a 19-year-old. The Academy agreed, nominating him for Best Supporting Actor. Overnight, Leonardo went from an unknown teenager to one of the most promising young actors in Hollywood. But with promise came pressure. As the mid-1990s unfolded, Leonardo carefully avoided being typecast. He chose roles in edgy, unconventional films, like The Basketball Diaries 1995, where he played a high school athlete spiraling into heroin addiction. It was a brutal, unflinching performance that mirrored the chaos he had seen growing up in Los Angeles. Critics hailed him as fearless, willing to take on parts other actors avoided. And then came Romeo plus Juliet, 1996. Directed by Baz Luhrmann, the modernized Shakespeare adaptation transformed DiCaprio into a global heartthrob. As Romeo, he was intense, romantic, devastatingly beautiful, the kind of young star teenage girls plastered on their walls. The film was a box office success, but for Leonardo, it marked the beginning of a trap. He was celebrated not for his craft, but for his face. He was no longer just an actor. He was an idol. The trap snapped shut in 1997 with Titanic. James Cameron's epic was a gamble, a 3-hour romance set against the backdrop of disaster. Studio executives feared it would sink at the box office. Instead, it became a cultural phenomenon. Titanic grossed over $2 billion, making it the highest-grossing film in history at the time. And at the center of it all was Leonardo DiCaprio, as Jack Dawson, the poor artist who falls in love with Kate Winslet's Rose. DiCaprio became the symbol of youthful romance. His face was everywhere, On posters, in magazines, on TV screens around the world. Teenagers screamed his name outside premieres. He couldn't leave his house without being mobbed by fans. Leomania swept across continents. To the public, he was perfect. To Hollywood, he was a guaranteed payday. But to Leonardo himself, it was suffocating. He despised the attention, the obsession with his looks, the reduction of his craft to mere celebrity. He wanted to be respected as an actor, not worshipped as a teen idol. "I will never do something like Titanic again," he once said, frustrated by the weight of fame. And indeed, after Titanic, his choices reflected that rebellion. Rather than cashing in on his global popularity, he turned to darker, more experimental projects. He worked with Danny Boyle in The Beach, 2000, explored historical epics with Gangs of New York, 2002, and partnered with Martin Scorsese for The Aviator, 2004. These films showed a Leonardo hungry for respect, chasing artistry over stardom. But the shadow of Titanic never faded. No matter how much he stretched himself, critics and audiences often framed his career in contrast to Jack Dawson. He was the boy from Titanic trying to prove he was more. The irony was cruel. The film that made him immortal also became his prison. In the years following Titanic, Leonardo's performances grew richer, more nuanced. Catch Me If You Can, 2002, showed his charm and wit. The Aviator earned him another Oscar nomination. Blood Diamond, 2006, and The Departed, 2006, solidified his reputation as one of the finest actors of his generation. He worked tirelessly, taking risks, transforming himself again and again. And yet, despite critical acclaim, the Academy continued to overlook him. Time after time, he was nominated and rejected. The headlines wrote themselves. Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor who could never win. His failures became memes, his determination mocked. For a man who had fought his way out of poverty, who had battled to be taken seriously, the rejection cut deep. It wasn't just about the Oscar. It was about validation, about proving to the world that he was more than just the pretty boy from Titanic. By the late 2000s, Leonardo DiCaprio had risen higher than almost anyone in Hollywood. He had wealth, power, influence, and a string of critically acclaimed performances. But he also carried the weight of ridicule, the endless whispers that maybe, despite his brilliance, he would never be recognized as the greatest. He had become a king of Hollywood, but a reluctant one, haunted by the crown he could never quite claim. By the late 1990s, Leonardo DiCaprio was the most famous young actor on the planet. Titanic had made him a household name, but the fame was overwhelming, suffocating. He could no longer walk down the street without being mobbed by screaming fans. Paparazzi followed him relentlessly, every move scrutinized, every relationship dissected. The world saw him as Jack Dawson, forever frozen at 20, a romantic hero who had captured hearts across the globe. But for Leonardo, the image became a prison. He longed to be recognized for his acting, for the risks he took, for the craft he had studied since childhood. Instead, magazine covers labeled him Leomania, reducing him to a teen idol. The pressure was relentless, and Leonardo rebelled. Alongside his friends, actors Tobey Maguire, Kevin Connolly, and a few others, he became part of what the tabloids called the Pussy Posse, a group of young Hollywood stars infamous for late-night partying, womanizing, and reckless behavior. Bars, nightclubs, strip clubs, they were everywhere, and so was the media, eager to paint Leonardo as a wild playboy. Stories of drunken nights and short-lived flings filled tabloids. He was linked to a seemingly endless line of models and actresses. For fans, it only heightened his allure. For critics, it reinforced the stereotype. Leonardo DiCaprio was just another pretty face, wasting his talent in parties and excess. Even as he delivered powerful performances in films like The Beach, 2000, and Gangs of New York, 2002, the image stuck. Hollywood has a long memory, and for Leonardo, the party boy reputation would haunt him for years. Worse still was his relationship with the Academy. Despite working with legendary directors like Martin Scorsese, despite pushing himself into demanding roles, Leonardo found himself continually rejected. Nominations came for The Aviator 2004, for Blood Diamond 2006, for The Wolf of Wall Street 2013, but the golden statue eluded him. Each year, the Academy passed him over. The rejection became a cruel joke. Memes spread across the internet. Leonardo DiCaprio, the man who could never win an Oscar. Audiences laughed at his expense, turning his failure into entertainment. His dedication, his discipline, his artistry, all overshadowed by a single missing trophy. For Leonardo, the irony was unbearable. He had worked tirelessly to shed the image of a teen idol, to prove himself as a serious actor. And he had succeeded. His performances were powerful, transformative, unforgettable. Yet, Hollywood still withheld its ultimate recognition. No matter how brilliant he was still treated as if he hadn't earned his place among the greats. The ridicule hurt. In interviews, he brushed it off with humor, but behind the smile was frustration. He admitted that the pressure to win an Oscar weighed on him, that he felt trapped in an endless cycle of proving himself, again and again, only to be dismissed. Meanwhile, his personal life became a spectacle of its own. His relationships with models half his age fueled headlines. Critics mocked him as a man who refused to grow up, who dated women in their 20s while he edged into his 40s. The internet turned his love life into a running joke. For Leonardo, who had always guarded his privacy fiercely, the invasion was another wound, proof that no matter what he did, the world would define him by its own narrative, not his truth. His activism, too, became a double-edged sword. Passionate about climate change, Leonardo used his fame to draw attention to the planet's crisis. He produced documentaries, gave speeches at the United Nations, and donated millions to environmental causes. But skeptics ridiculed him for hypocrisy, pointing to his luxury yachts, private jets, and lavish lifestyle. Instead of respect, his efforts often brought scorn. By the early 2010s, Leonardo DiCaprio was in a paradox. He was one of the most powerful actors in Hollywood, commanding tens of millions per role, working with the greatest directors, delivering masterful performances. Yet he was mocked as a playboy, dismissed as a hypocrite, and derided as the man who could never win an Oscar. Behind the glamorous premieres and the billion-dollar box office, Leonardo carried the weight of doubt and ridicule. The boy who had clawed his way out of poverty, who had fought through rejection and scorn, now faced a new battle, proving to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he was more than the caricature they had made him. The tragedy of Leonardo DiCaprio's rise was that the very things that made him great, his beauty, his fame, his relentless pursuit of perfection, also became the weapons used against him. He was trapped, not by failure, but by success, and as the years passed, the question grew louder. Would Leonardo DiCaprio ever escape the shadow of Jack Dawson? Would he ever be remembered as more than just the heartthrob who never won an Oscar? The stage was set for his greatest trial, a battle not against other actors, but against perception itself. By the mid-2010s, Leonardo DiCaprio was no longer the boyish idol of Titanic. He was a seasoned actor in his 40s with decades of acclaimed performances behind him. He had worked with Scorsese, Spielberg, Nolan, Tarantino, the greatest directors of his era. His films had earned billions. His name alone could guarantee a box office hit. And yet, he remained haunted by one absence: the Oscar. It had become a cultural obsession. Each year, when nominations were announced, Leonardo's name appeared, and each year, when the envelopes were opened, he walked away empty-handed. By now, his failure to win wasn't just a private pain. It was public mockery. Memes flooded the internet, late-night hosts made jokes, and his losses became entertainment for the world. For Leonardo, the endless cycle of ridicule was humiliating. He was giving everything to his craft. But was it ever enough? Then came The Revenant, 2015. Directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu, it was not just a film, it was an ordeal. The story of frontiersman Hugh Glass, left for dead in the frozen wilderness, demanded a performance of raw physical and emotional endurance. For Leonardo, it was the role of a lifetime, and perhaps his last chance to silence the laughter. Filming was brutal. Shot in remote, freezing locations with only natural light, the production pushed actors and crew to their limits. DiCaprio endured sub-zero temperatures, waded through icy rivers, and ate raw bison liver on camera. He suffered hypothermia, exhaustion, and frostbite. Every scream of agony, every gasp of breath, every drop of pain the audience saw was real. When The Revenant premiered, critics were stunned. This wasn't just acting, it was survival. DiCaprio's performance was primal, stripped of glamour, a man reduced to his most animal instincts. The boy once mocked as a teen idol had transformed into a force of nature. And when award season came, the narrative shifted. For the first time in his career, the momentum was undeniable. The Golden Globe, the BAFTA, the Screen Actors Guild Award. Each victory brought him closer to the one prize that had eluded him for more than 20 years. On February 28, 2016, the world held its breath as Julianne Moore opened the envelope at the Academy Awards. The words she read brought the Dolby Theater to its feet, and the Oscar goes to Leonardo DiCaprio. The standing ovation was thunderous. After 6 nominations and decades of waiting, Leonardo walked to the stage, his face a mixture of relief, triumph, and exhaustion. In his acceptance speech, he thanked his collaborators, his family, his supporters, but more than that, he used the moment not to bask in victory, but to shine a light on climate change, urging the world to act. It was the perfect DiCaprio moment. The personal victory transformed into a larger cause. The boy who had once been dismissed as a pretty face was finally recognized as one of the greatest actors of his time. The memes ended, the ridicule stopped, the crown was his, and yet the triumph carried its own tragedy. For years, Leonardo had fought to prove himself, to escape the shadow of Titanic. To win, he had endured physical suffering few actors would ever accept. The Oscar was not just a reward, it was a scar, proof of the battles he had fought to be taken seriously. Even in victory, he remained elusive. Leonardo DiCaprio has never married, never settled into the traditional life expected of Hollywood stars. His relationships, almost always with women decades younger, continued to fuel controversy and jokes. His activism for climate change drew both admiration and criticism, with detractors accusing him of hypocrisy. But in that moment, holding the golden statue he had chased for so long, none of that mattered. The world finally saw him as he wanted to be seen, not as Jack Dawson, not as the party boy, not as the eternal bachelor, but as an artist who had given everything for his craft. It had taken more than 20 years, countless humiliations, and endless ridicule. But Leonardo DiCaprio had won. The question was, now that he had achieved it, what would remain? Because sometimes, the greatest tragedies are not in failure, but in the cost of victory. Today, Leonardo DiCaprio is more than a movie star. He is a symbol of resilience, of reinvention, and of relentless pursuit of truth in art. With films like Titanic, The Departed, Inception, The Wolf of Wall Street, and The Revenant, he has become one of the defining actors of his generation, carving a legacy of daring choices and unforgettable performances. But his story is not just about cinema. It is about survival. The boy who grew up in a crime-ridden neighborhood, the young actor mocked as a teen idol, the man ridiculed for decades as the star who could never win an Oscar. He overcame them all. His eventual triumphs at the Academy Awards was not just a personal victory. It was a declaration that persistence matters, that artistry matters, that even in a world obsessed with image, talent can endure. Off-screen, Leonardo has become one of Hollywood's loudest voices for the planet. Through his Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, he has funded projects protecting endangered species, preserving forests, and combating climate change. He uses the platform built by fame, not merely to celebrate himself, but to advocate for the Earth, even if critics question his contradictions. His legacy, then, is twofold: the actor who gave us characters that will outlive us all, and the activist who reminds us of responsibilities bigger than ourselves. We admire him for Jack Dawson, for Jordan Belfort, for Hugh Glass. But perhaps the real Leonardo is not in any role. It is in his refusal to surrender, in his determination to be remembered not as a fleeting idol, but as an artist and a man who fought to define himself. And that is why Leonardo DiCaprio's story will endure long after the credits roll.